I drove past the house 3 times before I stopped. Not because I missed it. It sat at the end of a dirt road like a tooth left in a dead man's jaw, gray and leaning and impossible to ignore. But because something in me resisted stopping, the way your hand resists touching a hot stove before the pain even arrives. I was a surveyor for the county assessor's office, which meant I spent my days measuring things that other people had abandoned. Barns, silos, foreclosed farmhouses. I had a clipboard and a laser measure, and 11 years of practice at not feeling anything about empty buildings. I stopped the truck and got out. The date was October 4th. I remember because I'd just renewed my truck registration that morning, and the receipt was sitting on the passenger seat. The sky was low and colorless, the kind of sky that makes noon look like late afternoon. The house was 2 stories, wood-framed, the white paint gone to gray scales that curled off the siding like dead skin. All the windows were intact, which was unusual for a structure that the county records listed as uninhabited since 1987. I noted that in my clipboard. Intact glass. It seemed like a good sign at the time. I did the exterior measurements first, walking the perimeter with my laser tool, calling numbers into my recorder. 42 feet across the front, 31 deep. The porch boards were soft, but they held. The front door was unlocked, which was also in the records. The last owner had died intestate, and the property had passed through 3 different holding companies since then, none of them bothering to secure it properly. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not mildew, not the usual cocktail of mouse droppings and old insulation. Something else. Something that reminded me of the way a hospital room smells after a long illness has finally ended. A kind of chemical sweetness layered over something organic and spent. I stood in the doorway for a moment with my clipboard held against my chest like a shield I knew was useless. Then I went in. The ground floor was a standard layout. Living room, dining room, a narrow kitchen at the back. The furniture was still there, which happened more often than people think. Families clearing out a dead relative's house would sometimes take the valuables and leave everything else, as if the chairs and tables had become contaminated by association. There was a sofa with a floral pattern, sun-bleached to near white. A dining table with 4 chairs, a lamp with no bulb. I measured the rooms and wrote down the numbers and tried to focus on the numbers. It was in the kitchen that I first noticed the marks on the wall. Low down, near the baseboard, about a foot off the floor. I crouched to look at them. They were scratches, the kind a trapped animal makes, parallel lines in sets of 4, the wood beneath the wallpaper gouged deep and consistent, spaced about 2 inches apart. They ran along the entire back wall of the kitchen, roughly 12 feet of them. I told myself an animal had done it. A dog, maybe, or a large raccoon. I stood back up and went upstairs. The upper floor had 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. 2 of the bedrooms were empty. The third, at the end of the hall, had a single bed frame still in it. Rusted metal, no mattress. I measured the room and was turning to leave when I noticed the closet door. It was closed. Every other door in the house was open. I hadn't touched any of them. They'd simply all been standing open when I arrived. But this one was shut, and there was something wedged under it. I looked closer. It was a fork, a standard dinner fork, tines facing the door, handle pressed against the baseboard on the outside. Someone had used it to keep the closet shut from the outside. I should have left then. I know that. I've replayed the moment many times in the months since, always arriving at the same point where the right choice was, to walk back down the stairs and get in the truck and file my report from the parking lot of the gas station on Route 9. Instead, I reached down and pulled the fork away from the door. Nothing happened. The door stayed shut. I put my hand on the knob and opened it. The closet was empty. Bare wood walls, a single wooden rod for hanging clothes, a shelf above it. The smell was stronger in there, the hospital sweetness, and the floor of the closet was dark with something old and dried, a stain so long settled it had become part of the wood. I stood looking at it for a moment, then stepped back and closed the door. I didn't replace the fork. I finished the upstairs measurements. The numbers were clean and normal. I walked back down the stairs, through the dining room, toward the front door, and that was when I heard the sound from the kitchen, a slow, rhythmic scraping, the kind of sound a fingernail makes dragged across wood, 4 lines at a time, deliberate, patient, continuing. I did not go back into the kitchen. I walked out the front door at a pace I told myself was calm and professional, got into my truck, and drove to the gas station on Route 9. My hands were steady on the wheel, which surprised me. I sat in the parking lot and typed up my field notes on my phone and submitted the assessment. I described the house as structurally compromised, likely unsalvageable, recommended demolition. That was a lie. Structurally, the house was sound. I just needed it to come down. The county approved the demolition order 6 weeks later. I know this because I requested notification. On the morning the crew arrived to begin work, I got a call from the site foreman, a man named Garrett, who I'd worked with before on similar jobs. He said they'd opened the house to do a walkthrough before bringing in the equipment, and he wanted to ask me something. He said the closet door in the upstairs bedroom had it been closed when I was there. I told him yes. He said when his crew found it, it was open. I asked if the closet was empty. There was a pause before he answered. He said yes. He said it was empty, and then he asked me something else. He asked why someone had scratched marks into every wall on the inside of that closet. Low down, near the floor, 4 lines at a time, across every surface that could be reached by something lying flat on its back and stretching its arms out as far as they would go. I told him I didn't know. I told him to knock it down anyway. He did. I have not returned to Vellum Road. The lot is still empty. According to the county records, it has received no development applications. I check every month, which I understand is not a healthy thing to do, but I have found that it is better than not checking, because at least while I am checking, I know the number is 0 and the ground is bare, and nothing has started building there again. I found the notebook in my father's storage unit 3 weeks after his funeral, tucked between a collapsed surveying tripod and a box of topographical maps from the 1970s. My father had been a land surveyor for 31 years. He was meticulous, precise, the kind of man who kept every receipt in a labeled envelope and never once left a measurement unrecorded. The notebook was different from his others. The cover was warped, the pages swollen with old moisture, and on the inside front cover he had written a single line in red ink. "Do not finish this survey." I sat in the storage unit for a long time reading it. By the time I drove home, I had already decided to go. The property in question was a 340-acre parcel in Harlan County, Kentucky, commissioned in 1987 by a development company that no longer existed. My father had been sent alone, which was unusual. Standard practice required 2 surveyors for remote terrain. The notebook documented the first 2 days normally. Elevation readings, soil composition notes, boundary markers, the usual dry language of the profession. On the 3rd day, the entries changed. He wrote that he had found a structure not indicated on any existing plat map. A house, or what had been one. Stone foundation, timber frame mostly rotted through, standing in a clearing that did not appear on the aerial photographs he had been given. He wrote that the clearing felt wrong, and my father was not a man who used that kind of language. He noted that the compass behaved erratically within approximately 40 meters of the structure, spinning without settling, which he attributed to subsurface mineral deposits. He sketched the floor plan of the ruin. 6 rooms, In the center room, he found a vertical shaft in the floor, stone-lined, roughly 1 meter in diameter. He dropped a rock and did not hear it land. I drove to Harlan County on a Thursday in late October. I told no one where I was going, which I understand now was the first serious mistake. I had the notebook, a copy of the original commission documents I had pulled from my father's files, a GPS unit, and 3 days of supplies. The county recorder's office had no record of the development company. The parcel number my father had recorded corresponded to a tract listed simply as unincorporated private land. No owner of record, no tax history after 1961. The clerk looked at me for a moment too long when I asked about it, then looked back at her screen and said she couldn't help me further. The logging road that served as the property's only access had not been maintained in decades. I left my truck where the road became impassable and walked in. The terrain matched my father's descriptions precisely. I found his boundary markers, small orange flags on rusted wire stakes, still standing after 38 years, which unsettled me in a way I couldn't immediately name. Plastic degrades, orange fades. These were bright, taut, unmarked by time. I told myself the climate in the hollow was simply stable. I kept walking. I found the clearing at 2:30 in the afternoon. The timber frame had collapsed further since my father's visit, but the stone foundation held, and the clearing itself was exactly as he had described it. Circular, perhaps 30 meters across, the tree line surrounding it unnaturally uniform, as though the forest had retreated to a measured distance and stopped. No undergrowth grew inside the clearing. The soil was dark and fine, almost powdery, and it did not smell like soil. It smelled faintly chemical, antiseptic, which I could not explain, and which I wrote down in my own notebook because recording details was the only way I knew to manage the feeling that was building in my chest. My GPS unit placed me accurately. My compass did not work. I stood at the edge of the clearing for several minutes before stepping inside. The temperature dropped when I crossed the tree line, not gradually, but immediately, like opening a door. I checked the thermometer on my pack. 11 degrees Celsius cooler than the ambient temperature I had recorded 20 meters back. I wrote it down. My handwriting was already worse than usual. The center room of the ruin was easy to locate, even through the collapsed timbers, because the shaft was still visible, a dark circle in the pale powder of the floor. I got as close as I was willing to get, which was about 2 meters, and I shone my flashlight down into it. The beam died at approximately 4 meters depth, not because the shaft ended, but because the light simply stopped penetrating, as though the darkness below had density. I am an engineer. I work in materials testing. I do not believe in darkness that has density. I wrote down what I saw and I noted the time, which was 3:11 p.m., and I noted that. I could not hear any sound from outside the clearing. No wind, no birds, nothing, despite the fact that I had been hearing both continuously for the entire hike in. I was still crouching over the notebook when I heard my father's voice. It came from below, from the shaft. It said my name once, in the exact inflection he had used when I was a child, and had done something he needed to address. Not angry, calibrated, a tone engineered to produce compliance. I stood up immediately and took 4 steps backward, and then stood very still. The rational explanations arrived quickly, and I cycled through them. Auditory hallucination from stress. Sound conducting through subsurface rock from some distant source. My own internal monologue, externalizing under psychological pressure. I was still cycling through them when I heard it again. My name. Then a sound that was not language, low and sustained, and it did not stop when I started walking backward toward the tree line, and it did not stop when I crossed back into the forest, and it did not stop until I was nearly 200 meters away and moving at a pace that was very close to running. I did not stop moving until I reached my truck. I drove 4 hours without stopping and checked into a motel outside Lexington and sat on the bed with the notebook in my lap. I read the final entry my father had written, which I had not read carefully before because it was cramped and difficult, and I had assumed it was simply his last set of field notes. It was not field notes. It said, "I came back a second time. I don't know why I came back. I told myself it was professional obligation. I stood at the shaft for a long time. I heard her. Margaret has been dead for 6 years, and I heard her voice, and she said things that she would have known how to say, things no one else would know, and I stayed longer than I should have, and when I left I could not remember clearly how long I had been there. I think it was 2 days. My food was gone. It felt like an hour. Do not go back. Do not finish this survey. Whatever is in that ground is patient, and it knows exactly what to offer you. I don't know how it knows. I don't know what it wants. I only know that I wanted to go back, and I have been wanting to go back every day since, and I think about it more than I think about anything else. My father died of a cardiac event. That was the official finding. He was 64 and otherwise healthy, and there was no arterial disease, and the cardiologist used the phrase idiopathic, which means without known cause. He died at his desk on a Tuesday morning. On his desk they found a printed map of Harlan County with a route marked in red pen, and the end point of that route was the logging road. I have not gone back. I have not gone back, and I am writing this down because the wanting has started. Quiet at first, then louder, and I need there to be a record of when it started and how it progressed, in case the progression follows the same curve my father described, in case one morning I find myself on a highway I did not choose, driving toward a county I know I should never enter again. And I need whoever finds this to understand that it will not look like compulsion from the outside. It will look like a man with a professional interest, and a reasonable explanation, and a bag already packed. And I need them to understand that the explanation will feel completely true to me. That is the part I am most afraid of. Not the shaft, not the voice, not the cold, but the fact that right now, at 2:17 in the morning, in a lit room, with every rational faculty I possess fully operational, going back sounds less like danger and more like finally finishing what my father started. And I cannot tell any more where that thought came from, whether it is mine, or whether something patient and underground put it there, and whether there is any difference left between those two things. I was 34 years old when I stopped trusting maps. Not the digital kind, not the paper kind, not any kind. I had been a field technician for a telecom company, driving rural California routes to inspect relay towers that sat at the edges of things. The edges of towns, of farmland, of whatever came after farmland when the road stopped pretending to go somewhere. I knew those roads the way you know a recurring dream, intimately, and with a low-grade suspicion that something in them was not fixed. The job was solitary, which I had always preferred. My supervisor sent coordinates by email every Monday morning, and I spent the week finding them. That was the whole of it, or it was supposed to be. It was October when I first noticed the road that had no business being there. I was driving a stretch of Highway 46, east of Paso Robles, a flat gray corridor through dead vineyards, when a dirt track appeared on my right, cutting between two rows of dried vines toward a structure in the distance. I had driven that exact road perhaps 60 times in 3 years. There was no track. I slowed, looked at it through the passenger window, noted the tread marks pressed into the pale dirt, and kept driving. That night I pulled up satellite imagery on my laptop. The road was not there. The field was unbroken. I told myself the imagery was outdated, which was often true, and I went to sleep. The second time was 2 weeks later. Different county, a 2-lane outside Coalinga that ran alongside an irrigation canal. The track appeared on my left, between the road and the canal, impossibly narrow, barely wide enough for a vehicle, running parallel to me for perhaps a quarter-mile before angling away into a dry creek bed. I pulled over and watched it in my side mirror. Nothing moved on it. The dirt was pale and undisturbed except for a single set of tire tracks that went in and did not come back out. I have no explanation for what I did next, except that I was tired and professionally incurious, and told myself it was a maintenance access road for the Canal Authority. I drove on. I did not look up the imagery that night. I think, in the part of my mind that was already understanding something, I did not want to. The third time was in December, and it was different because I stopped. I was outside Buttonwillow on a road I could have driven blind when the track appeared directly ahead of me, bisecting my lane, running perpendicular across the highway and into a field of brown cotton stalks on both sides. I stopped the truck in the road. There was no other traffic. The track was fresh, the dirt dark and damp as though it had been turned recently, and it went across the highway without interruption, as though the highway were the interruption and the track were the original thing. I sat there for what the dashboard clock told me was 11 minutes, though I remember it as much longer. And then I got out of the truck. The air smelled like irrigation water and something beneath it, something organic and low, like turned soil after rain but without the rain. I crouched at the edge of the track and looked both ways along it. To my left it ran into the cotton field and disappeared. To my right, it ran perhaps 40 feet before ending at what I can only describe as a door, though there was nothing for a door to belong to. It was a wooden frame, roughly constructed, standing free in the dirt, and it contained darkness that had no relationship to the light around it. It was mid-afternoon. The sun was flat and present, and the sky was white-blue in the way Central California sky is in December. The darkness inside that frame was the darkness of a room with no windows at 3 in the morning. I stood up. I walked back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat and gripped the wheel and understood that I was going to drive away, and that this was the correct decision and that I was going to think about this for the rest of my life. I drove away. I thought about it for the rest of my life, which is still ongoing but feels provisional in a way it did not feel before December. I filed no report. There was no category in our company's field forms for what I had seen. I began, in January, to photograph the roads I drove before I drove them, and to compare those photographs to what I found. In 6 weeks, I documented 4 discrepancies: a bridge that appeared in my photograph and was not there when I arrived, a crossroads that was in neither my photograph nor any map, but that I drove through and felt as a physical thing, a pressure change, a brief darkness, a smell, a mile marker numbered 0 standing at the side of a road where the sequence made no sense, and most recently, a road sign that read only with a blank green rectangle, no text, no number, the reflective surface catching my headlights perfectly and giving back nothing. I am writing this in a motel in Fresno on a Tuesday in March. Tomorrow I have a route that takes me back past Buttonwillow. I have been past Buttonwillow 4 times since December, and the field has been a field and the cotton has been cotton, and there has been nothing perpendicular in the road. I have no reason to think tomorrow will be different, but I have started to notice that the tracks, when they appear, are always fresh. And I have started to wonder whether fresh means recent or whether it means expecting, whether something has been pressing that dirt from the other side, smoothing it, making it ready, the way you would set a table before guests arrived. I am not a man who uses language like that. I am a man who reads coordinates and drives to them and writes down what he finds. What I am finding is that some coordinates are not on any map because they are coordinates in the other direction. And something at the end of those dirt tracks has been noting my routes the way I note my towers, methodically, repeatedly, learning when I come and when I leave and how long I sit in my truck before I make a decision. I locked my motel door tonight, and then I stood there and understood that a lock on a door only works if the thing you are keeping out is approaching from outside.